Torches, shadows, 6 angry faces closing in on one boy. Ayo's back hit the mud wall of a compound he had never seen before in his life, and yet somehow, every stone of it felt like a memory that wasn't his. You dare come to Enugu and pretend you don't know me? A man's voice, thick with fury, grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him forward until their faces almost touched. Your grandfather took everything from my family, and now you stand in my compound, wearing his face, and you tell me you don't remember. Ayo's hands shook. He looked down. There, on his forearm, a scar he had never seen before, jagged and old, as if it had healed on someone else's skin. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words that came out weren't fully his own. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Please. I've never met you in my life. The man's grip tightened. Behind him, 3 more relatives stepped closer, torches raised, faces lit gold and furious. An old woman spat at his feet. Liar, she hissed. You people never change. You take, and when the debt comes for you, you hide behind confusion. A younger man, maybe a nephew, grabbed a length of firewood from a nearby stack and hefted it like a club. Let me finish this now, before he runs like his grandfather ran. Wait, the first man snapped, though his fist stayed knotted in Ayo's collar. I want him to say it first. I want him to admit what his blood did to mine. Ayo's heart slammed against his ribs. Somewhere, buried deep in a part of his mind that didn't feel like his own, a memory flickered. A business deal, a betrayal, a name that wasn't his, whispered like an accusation. He could almost taste the words rising in his own throat, words he had never learned, in a voice that wasn't quite his. Say it, the old woman screamed. Say his name, say what he owes us. The fist came up, and that single, frozen second, was the moment Ayo realized something inside him had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. 3 weeks earlier, Ayo was just a grandson, kneeling at a deathbed, watching the only father he had ever known fight for breath. His grandfather's hand, thin and trembling, found his. Ayo, the old man whispered, promise me something. Anything, Papa, anything you ask. Don't let my name die with me. His breath rattled, and for a moment, his eyes lost focus entirely, staring at something only he could see. A man is not truly gone, as long as someone still carries what he was. Carry my name forward, Ayo. Let me be remembered. Let me matter. I promise, Papa. I swear it. The old man's grip tightened, one last time, fierce for a dying man, and then loosened forever. Ayo buried his grandfather 3 days later, and grief did something to him that grief often does. It made a desperate boy reckless. He couldn't stop hearing that final whisper, carry my name forward. He turned it over and over in his mind, until it stopped sounding like a request, and started sounding like an unfinished debt of his own. That was when he remembered a story his mother used to tell him as a child, half warning, half legend. A market that appeared only once every generation, hidden deep in the forest, where the old paths forgot themselves. A market where the currency wasn't money, it was names. He told no one where he was going. His mother would have stopped him. Instead, he packed a single bag, left before sunrise, and walked 3 days into the forest, past the point where paths disappeared, and the trees grew close enough to blot out the sky, until the air itself began to smell like smoke that had no fire, and he heard voices that had no mouths speaking his name before he'd said a word to anyone. The market unfolded in front of him like a wound opening in the world. Stalls made of bone-white wood stretched in every direction, further than the forest should have allowed. Behind each one stood a trader with no face, just a smooth, featureless space where features should be, and a voice that came from everywhere at once, layered, overlapping, patient. Welcome, Ayo, one of them said, and the sound of his own name in that voiceless mouth made his skin crawl. You already know why you've come. His mouth went dry. I want to buy a name. Not buy, the trader corrected, tilting its faceless head. Trade. Names are not sold here. They are exchanged. What do you offer? My own. Yo's voice cracked, but he pushed the words out anyway. I want my grandfather's name, Chukwuemeka, to be carried on. I'll give you mine in exchange. The trader was silent for a long moment. Behind him, other stalls stirred, not words, but a low, hungry hum, like 100 people whispering at once, all of them leaning closer to listen. A generous offer, the trader finally said. But understand this, boy, before you agree to something you cannot undo. A name is never empty. Every name carries what its owner left unfinished. Debts, promises broken, wounds never closed. When you take his name, you do not simply take 3 syllables. You take his ledger. Every account still open in his life becomes an account open in yours. Do you understand what I am telling you? I don't care. Grief made him brave in ways caution never could. He asked me to carry his name forward. I made him a promise. Give it to me. Very well. The trader's voice carried something that, on a face, might have been pity. So be it. The trader reached out, and where a hand should have been, there was only smoke curling into the shape of fingers, and pressed it to Ayo's forehead. Pain exploded behind his eyes, white and total. For one unbearable second, Ayo forgot his own face. He forgot the sound of his own voice, the shape of his own name, the feeling of being himself at all. And when the world came rushing back, gasping, he was standing alone on the forest path. The market was gone, as if it had never existed. And a name that wasn't his own sat heavy in his chest like a swallowed stone. He walked home in silence for 3 days, telling himself over and over that it was done, that he had honored his grandfather, that he had given the old man exactly what he'd asked for. He didn't yet understand what he had truly agreed to. 2 days after he returned, an old woman on the street called out, "Chukwuemeka," and Ayo's body turned toward her before his mind even registered that the name wasn't his. That was the first sign. The second came that night. He stood in front of the small cracked mirror in his room, brushing his teeth, half thinking about nothing at all, and for one flickering instant, an old man's face stared back at him instead of his own, lined, tired, familiar in a way that made his stomach drop. He dropped the mirror. It didn't break. When he picked it up again, his own face was there, pale and shaking, staring back at him like a stranger. If a story like this keeps you glued to the screen, hit subscribe right now, because what happens to Ayo next is about to get a lot more dangerous, and you will not want to miss it. The next morning, Ayo woke up, standing, not lying in his bed, standing in the middle of a stranger's courtyard, sunlight blinding him, dust on his sandals from a walk he had no memory of taking. An elderly woman sat on a low stool nearby, weaving a mat, her hands slow and arthritic. She looked up at him, and her whole body went still, the mat slipping unnoticed from her lap. Chukwuemeka. She breathed the name like it had 40 years of pain packed into 2 syllables. After everything, after all this time, you have the nerve to come back and stand in my courtyard? Ayo's mouth opened before his mind caught up. Ngozi. The name came from somewhere that wasn't him, smooth and immediate, like a well-worn habit. I should have come sooner, I know that. The woman rose from her stool, trembling with something between fury and disbelief. You left me pregnant and disappeared into the city for 20 years. 20 years, Chukwuemeka. Your daughter grew up asking me why her father hated her enough to never once look back. And now, when you're an old man with nothing left to lose, you dare speak my name like it costs you nothing. It costs me everything. The words came out of him, half his own confusion, half something older and heavier speaking through him. Fragments surfaced in his mind that weren't memories exactly, more like scars that ached without a wound. A young woman crying in a doorway. A letter drafted 100 times and never sent. A child, years later, staring at a photograph and asking who that man was. I was afraid. I was a coward, Ngozi, and I let shame keep me from doing right by you and by our daughter, and I have carried that weight every single day since I left. Words. She spat the word out like poison. stepping closer, jabbing a finger toward his chest. Words cost you nothing. Do you know what it cost me to raise a child alone? Do you know what it cost her to grow up without a father's name to claim? Then let me pay with more than words. Ayo, or the thing moving his mouth, reached into a pocket he didn't remember filling and pulled out a folded bundle of money, more than he had ever owned in his own name. For her school fees, for everything I owed and never gave. It will never be enough. I know that, but it is what I have. The old woman stared at the money for a long time, her jaw tight, her eyes wet and furious all at once. You think money undoes 20 years? No, Ayo said, and this time he wasn't certain whether it was his voice or his grandfather's guilt speaking through him. Perhaps, by now, it no longer mattered. Nothing undoes 20 years. But silence was the crime. At least let this be the end of the silence. Her hands shook as she finally reached out and took the money, folding it against her chest like something fragile. It's too late for an apology to fix what you broke, she said, quieter now. But it is not too late for the truth to finally be spoken out loud. Ayo felt something in his chest loosen. Not healed, but settled. One debt closed. He staggered back into his own body on the walk home, gasping like a man surfacing from deep water, utterly shaken by what had just happened, and terrified of what else his grandfather had left unfinished, waiting in the dark to drag him somewhere new. He didn't have long to recover. That very night, the confrontation you already witnessed, Ayo found himself dragged bodily by memory and instinct alike to a compound across town, pulled there the same way he'd been pulled to Ngozi's courtyard, except this time, the reckoning waiting for him was far less forgiving. You dare come to Enugu and pretend you don't know me, the man's voice roared, grabbing his shirt and yanking him close enough to smell the rage on his breath. Now we understand what Ayo could not, in that first frozen moment. Decades ago, his grandfather and this man's father had built a trading business together from nothing. Cloth, spices, imported goods, carried up from the coast. And when the business finally turned a real profit, after years of struggle and sacrifice, Chukwuemeka forged the partnership papers in the dead of night, cut his partner out entirely, and walked away with everything they had built together. The partner spent the rest of his life trying to prove the theft and failing, dying in poverty and shame, and his children grew up hearing the story like scripture, passed down like a wound that never closed. The man who stole their birthright. Please, Ayo begged, the fist still raised above him, torchlight flickering across 6 furious faces. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know any of this until this very moment. Enough lies, the old woman, the partner's widow, shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. Beat him. Let him feel 1/10 of what our family felt. The younger man with the firewood stepped forward eagerly. Wait, Iyo gasped, and something inside him surged, some buried memory finally breaking the surface at the worst possible moment, and words poured out of him that were not entirely his own, yet felt truer than anything he had ever said in his life. Your father built that business with his bare hands, brick by brick, deal by deal, while my grandfather sat beside him, taking half the credit for none of the risk. And when it finally succeeded, my grandfather forged the papers and let your family starve while he grew fat on what wasn't his. I cannot undo 40 years of that, but I can undo the theft itself, right now, tonight. He pulled a folded document from his jacket, one he didn't remember carrying, one that had appeared in his possession the way everything else had, unearned and undeniable, the original, unforged partnership agreement, hidden for decades, and somehow now in his hands. This is proof, he said, holding it out with a shaking hand. Take it to the courts. Reclaim what was stolen from your family. Half of everything my grandfather built from that business onward. By every honest accounting, it should have always been yours. The man's fist lowered, slowly, his whole body shaking now, not with rage, but with disbelief, staring at the document like it might vanish if he blinked. Why would you do this? He demanded, voice cracking. You could destroy your own family's name with a single piece of paper. Yo, Chukwuemeka's voice, thick with 40 years of buried guilt, finally given a mouth to speak through, answered without hesitation. Because a debt unpaid doesn't disappear. It waits in the walls of a house. It waits in the blood of the next generation. It waited for me, and I am done letting it wait for anyone else. The torches lowered, one by one. The fury in the compound didn't vanish. Grief that old never fully vanishes, but it cracked, just enough for something like justice to breathe through it. The widow took the document with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it, clutching it to her chest, weeping now instead of screaming. Ayo walked out of that compound alive, trembling and lighter than before, as if a second stone had finally been lifted from his chest. 3 days passed with no visions. No strange names called out on the street. No strangers' memories dragging him across town in the middle of the night. Ayo began to believe, cautiously, hopefully, that it was finally over. That he had paid what his grandfather owed, one debt at a time, and the ledger was closed for good. He sat with his mother that evening on their veranda, sharing a simple meal, jollof rice, plantain, the ordinary comfort of home, the first truly ordinary night he'd had in weeks. She laughed at something small he said, some joke about the neighbor's goat wandering into their yard again, and for a moment, everything felt like it used to. Safe, whole, entirely his own. You've been quiet these past weeks, his mother said, studying him over her plate. Ever since your grandfather passed. Are you all right, my son? I'm all right, Mama, he lied, and hated himself a little for it. Just grieving, I think. That's all. She reached across and squeezed his hand. He would be proud of you, you know that? Ayo smiled and said nothing, because he didn't know it. Not yet. He didn't know if what he'd done these past weeks was honor or unraveling, and he had no way of knowing, sitting there in the golden evening light, that it was the last quiet night he would have for a very long time. If you think Ayo has already paid the worst of it, comment "not yet" below, because the heaviest debt in this entire story hasn't even shown its face. It came for him 3 nights later, in his sleep, dragging him not across town this time, but decades into the past, into a memory so vivid it felt less like a dream and more like drowning in someone else's life. His grandfather, young and reckless, sat cross-legged across a gambling mat from a neighbor. A good man, a farmer, broad-shouldered and laughing easily, betting the deed to his own land on a single game of dice, because Chukwuemeka had spent weeks convincing him the dice were fair, the odds were even, the game was nothing but harmless fun between friends. They weren't fair. It was never harmless. Ayo watched, powerless inside his grandfather's own memory, unable to shout a warning, unable to stop what was already written, as the dice were switched in the final roll. A flick of the wrist, a sleight of hand, learned from card sharks in the city, and the farmer's easy laughter died in his throat as he realized, one heartbeat too late, that everything his family had worked for, 3 generations of it, now belonged to another man. You cheated me, the farmer whispered in the memory, staring at the dice like they might change back if he looked hard enough. A bet is a bet, young Chukwuemeka said, and there was no guilt in his voice at all, only the cold satisfaction of a man who has just won everything. The farmer died within the decade, broken and landless, renting a single room in the very town his ancestors had once owned outright. His widow, blind now, ancient, having outlived her husband by nearly 40 years, was still alive, and the land Chukwuemeka won that night, the land taken with a rigged pair of dice from a man who trusted him, was the very land Ayo's mother lived on today. The home Ayo had grown up in, the veranda where they had shared their meal 3 nights before, laughing about a neighbor's wandering goat. Ayo woke gasping, drenched in sweat, his own bed suddenly feeling like it belonged to someone else entirely, and understood with sick, sinking certainty exactly what he was going to have to do. He found her the next morning, the blind widow, seated outside a rented room, barely larger than a closet, her hands folded in her lap, Her clouded eyes turned towards sounds she could no longer see. "I know why you've come," she said, before he spoke a single word, before his footsteps had even fully reached her. "I've been waiting 40 years for someone from that family to walk up this path." Ayo's throat closed. "I want to make it right, whatever that means. I want to try. Your grandfather cheated my husband out of his life's work with a rigged pair of dice, and it broke him slowly until the day he died, a poor man in a rented room. What does right even look like to a boy like you?" Ayo already knew the answer. It was the one thing he had been dreading since the memory first surfaced, the one thing he had spent the entire walk over trying to talk himself out of, and failing. "The land," he said, and his voice cracked completely on the word. "It's yours. It was always yours. It should never have left your family." The widow went very still, her weathered hands tightening in her lap. "Your family lives on that land, boy. I know. Your mother lives on that land. I know." His voice broke entirely now, tears streaking down his face. "And she doesn't even know I'm about to give it away. She has no idea any of this is happening." "Then why do it?" the old woman asked, and for the first time, her voice softened, just slightly, curious despite herself. "Your grandfather is dead. The theft is 40 years buried. No court, no elder, no living witness could force you to hand over your family's home for a debt you never made." Yo was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer honest enough to give a blind woman who had waited 40 years for exactly this reckoning. "Because I carry his name now," he finally said, "and a name that lies about what it cost is not a name worth carrying at all." He signed the papers that same afternoon, in the presence of a local elder, hands shaking so badly he could barely form his own signature, not Chukwuemeka's signature, his own, the first thing in 3 weeks that had felt entirely, undeniably his. He walked home afterward, with the weight of what he'd done sitting in his stomach, like a stone dropped down a well, sinking further with every step. His mother was already waiting on the veranda when he arrived home. The same veranda, the same spot where they had shared a quiet meal only days before. Except now, a stone-faced official from the land registry had already come and gone, already delivered the news, before Ayo could find the courage to say it himself. "Tell me it isn't true," she said, and her voice was flat in the particular way that meant she already knew, and was only giving him one last chance to lie to her. "Mama, tell me my son did not sign away the only home I have ever known without asking me, without warning me, without a single word of explanation. I didn't have a choice." The words felt hollow even as he said them, and he heard how hollow they sounded. "You always have a choice, Ayo." Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let herself cry. She was too angry to cry, and too proud to let him see her break. "You just chose your grandfather's guilt over your own mother's home, over my home, over everything I built, raising you alone in this house. It was never really ours, Mama, not honestly. Grandfather stole it from a farmer with rigged dice, and that man died poor because of it. And his widow has been waiting 40 years for someone to finally—" "I don't care about 40 years ago," she cried, finally breaking. "I care about tonight. Where am I supposed to sleep tonight, Ayo? Where are we supposed to go?" Ayo had no answer for that. There wasn't one. He stood there and let the silence between them say everything words couldn't. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, he understood, fully and completely, that some debts, even paid in full, still leave a wound behind that no amount of honesty can close. She turned and walked into the house without another word, without looking back. He didn't follow her. He simply sat down on the steps of a home that was no longer theirs, and wept until there was nothing left in him to weep with. That night, the pull came one final time, not to another stranger's memory, but back into the forest, back down the exact path he'd walked 3 weeks earlier, toward the market that only appeared once every generation. The faceless trader was waiting for him exactly where he'd left it, as though no time had passed at all. "The ledger is closed," it said, before Iyo could speak a word. Every debt your grandfather left unpaid has been settled. The woman he abandoned, the partner he betrayed, the land he stole. You have carried his name with more honor in 3 short weeks than he ever carried it himself in an entire lifetime. Then give me back my own. Ayo's voice was steady now, hollowed out, exhausted, but steady. You said it would be returned once the debts were paid. Pay me what you owe. The trader reached toward him again, smoke curling into the shape of fingers, and pressed it gently to his forehead. The pain came and went in a single instant this time, and when the world rushed back, Ayo felt his own face again, his own voice, his own name, sitting light and familiar in his chest for the first time in 3 long weeks. Relief hit him so hard, his knees nearly buckled beneath him. It is done, the trader said. Go home, Ayo. What's left to rebuild is yours to rebuild now, not his. He turned to leave the market behind forever, already thinking of how he would begin to make things right with his mother, already grieving the home they'd lost, and already planning how to build a new one from nothing. And then he stopped. A boy stood at the market's edge. Younger than Ayo, no older than 16, desperate eyes, trembling hands, the exact same expression Ayo knew he himself must have worn 3 weeks earlier, standing on this very path. Behind the boy, in the shadows between 2 bone-white stalls, a faceless trader was already leaning close, already whispering the same offer Ayo had once accepted without a second thought. My grandmother, the boy was saying, voice shaking, tears cutting clean lines down his dusty face. She's dying. She raised me alone. I want to carry her name forward after she's gone. I'll trade you mine for it. Wait, Ayo tried to say, taking a step forward. Wait, don't. But no sound came out. He opened his mouth again, desperate now, and still nothing, as if the market itself had decided his warning had no place here, as if some rule, older than language, forbade one trade from interfering with another. He watched the trade happen. He watched the boy's knees buckle exactly the way his own had buckled, 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. He watched the market slowly begin to fold itself back into the forest, patient, ancient, endlessly patient, already waiting for whoever would walk this path next, whenever grief made them desperate enough to come looking. And Ayo, carrying his own name once more, and the permanent, unshakable weight of everything it had cost him to earn it back, turned and walked home in silence, understanding at last, fully and finally, that the market never truly closes, it only waits for someone new to walk in as someone else walks out. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, that's exactly what African folklore was always meant to do. Not just entertain, but leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. If you want more stories like this, stories that don't just teach you a lesson, but make you feel the weight of every consequence behind it, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment telling us which debt you think was the hardest for Ayo to pay, and share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Ancient stories, timeless power. We'll see you in the next one.